Somewhere there is a runway 2 miles long, wide enough to land the heaviest aircraft ever built, and grass is growing through the cracks in it. Hangars stand empty. Tower windows are gray with dust. No aircraft has taken off here in years, maybe decades. Drive up to the gate and it looks like exactly what it appears to be: an abandoned airfield. A relic of some past war, a vast expanse of cracked concrete slowly being reclaimed by weeds, a dead place. It is one of the most quietly valuable pieces of strategic real estate a country can hold, and the reason has almost nothing to do with the buildings, because that runway represents something that is now, in many places, almost impossible to create. Miles of reinforced concrete, engineered to bear enormous weight, sitting on a huge cleared site, with the airspace, the approaches, and the permissions that go with it. Building a new one from scratch today would cost a fortune and take years, if it could be permitted at all. And so the old one, cracked and weedy and apparently abandoned, is not worthless. It is a capability held in reserve, a door that can be reopened if the day ever comes that a nation needs it. Here is the fact that reframes the whole thing. The empty airfield is not a failure or a ruin, it is a bet. A nation is quietly wagering that keeping this cracked concrete, rather than selling it off for development, will one day be worth far more than the money it costs to hold, on a day that may never arrive but cannot be ruled out. This is the full ledger: why a runway is nearly impossible to replace, what mothballing actually means and what it costs, the brutal economics of reactivation, the constant pressure to sell the land, the handful of ways such a site can earn while it waits, and the strategic gamble at the heart of keeping a dead airfield alive. Let me open the ledger. Why a runway cannot be replaced. Start with the thing that makes the whole asset valuable: the runway itself. A major military runway is not just a strip of tarmac. It is a monumental piece of civil engineering, miles long in some cases, and built to a depth and strength that can absorb the pounding of the heaviest aircraft, fully loaded, landing again and again for decades. That concrete is engineered, layered, and reinforced in ways an ordinary road never is. Underneath it run drainage, fuel lines, and services on a scale to match. Now, think about what it would take to build a new one today. First, the land. You need an enormous, flat, cleared site with nothing tall nearby, in the right place with the right approaches. That kind of land, near anywhere useful, is either extraordinarily expensive or unavailable, because the modern world has built on all the good sites. Second, the permissions. Creating a new airfield means noise, airspace, environmental impact, and disruption on a massive scale. Getting that approved, near any population, in a modern regulated country, ranges from wildly expensive to politically impossible. Communities fight new airports for decades. Third, the cost and the time. Even with the land and the permissions, laying miles of aviation-grade concrete, building the drainage and the fuel systems and the approaches, is a project of years and a budget of a scale few things justify. So a functioning military runway, once it exists, is close to irreplaceable. Not because the concrete is exotic, but because the combination of land, permission, and enormous sunk construction can almost never be assembled again. An airfield that already exists holds a value that a new one could not be built to match at anything like the same cost. That is why a nation hesitates, long and hard, before it lets one go. You can watch this hesitation play out across decades, in country after country. A field goes quiet. The pressure to sell builds. Reports are written, arguing both sides. And very often, the decision is not made at all, which is itself a decision: to hold, to wait, to keep paying the quiet cost of an open option rather than take the irreversible step. Airfields that survive longest are frequently the ones nobody could quite bring themselves to kill, held alive as much by the fear of a wrong, irreversible choice as by any positive plan. Once that runway is broken up and the land is sold and built over, it is gone forever. You cannot get it back at any price. And that irreversibility is the single most important feature of the whole asset. So hold on to it, because it will return again and again. Almost everything else in economics can be undone. A bad investment can be sold, a wrong hire can be replaced, a closed shop can be reopened. A runway that has been broken up and built over cannot be unbuilt. Houses are there, families live in them. No government on Earth is going to evict a neighborhood to pour concrete for a capability it might need. So the decision to sell an airfield is not like other decisions. It is a door that locks behind you, and that changes the entire way a careful nation weighs it. What mothballing actually means. So what happens to an airfield that is no longer needed for active flying, but that a nation is not ready to give up? It gets mothballed. And mothballing is a spectrum, not a single state, which is the key to understanding the cost. At one end is full active status, an airfield in constant use, fully staffed, everything maintained. That is expensive, and it is not what we are talking about. At the other end is complete disposal. The land sold, the runway dug up, the site redeveloped, the capability gone forever. Also not mothballing. Mothballing lives in between, and it comes in degrees. A lightly mothballed field might be kept in a state where it could return to service relatively quickly. Runway maintained, essential systems preserved, a minimal staff, security in place. Expensive to hold, but fast to reactivate. A deeply mothballed field is closer to preserved abandonment. Its runway is left largely alone. The buildings are sealed or allowed to decay. The site is held but not actively maintained. Cheap to hold, but slow and costly to bring back. And here is the central tension of the whole asset. Less spent holding it, the more it costs to reactivate. The more spent keeping it ready, the more it costs every year for a day that may never come. Every mothballed airfield sits somewhere on that dial, and choosing where is the entire economic decision. And the dial is not set once and forgotten, it drifts. A field placed in careful light mothballing, fully intending to keep it ready, quietly slides toward cold neglect as budgets tighten and attention wanders, and each year's small deferral of maintenance seems harmless. Nobody decides to let the runway rot. It rots by 1,000 small economies, each defensible on its own, until one day someone asks what it would cost to reactivate and discovers the answer has quietly tripled while nobody was watching. Managing a mothballed field is really the discipline of holding a chosen point on the dial against the constant gravitational pull toward cheap neglect. Spend to keep it warm, and you pay every year for readiness you may never use. Let it go cold to save money, and you may find, when the crisis comes, that reactivating it costs more and takes longer than you can afford. There is no free position on the dial. There is only the bet you are willing to make. The cost of holding nothing. You might assume a closed airfield is nearly free to hold. Nobody is flying, nobody is there, so surely the costs stop. They do not, and the reasons reveal the real nature of the asset. Security is first and unavoidable. An airfield is an enormous site, and an unsecured one is an invitation to trespass, theft, illegal use, and liability. Even a deeply mothballed field has to be watched, fenced, and controlled across a perimeter measured in miles. A runway itself, if you intend to keep it usable, must be maintained against nature. Concrete cracks. Weeds and roots get in and widen the cracks. Water pools and freezes and breaks the surface apart. Drainage silts up. Left completely alone, a runway degrades, and every year of neglect adds to the eventual cost of bringing it back. Maintaining it is expensive. Not maintaining it is a deferred and growing bill. This is the trap inside the trap. Deferred maintenance on a runway does not stay the same size while you ignore it. It compounds. A hairline crack admits water. Water widens it, frost shatters the edges, a root finds the gap, and a repair that would have cost little this year costs several times as much in 5, and by 10, the section may need full reconstruction. The airfield left alone to save money is not frozen in place. It is actively, silently getting more expensive to save every single season, whether anyone is looking or not. Land itself carries cost, rates, management, environmental monitoring, and the simple burden of owning a vast site that produces nothing. And an old airfield often carries environmental history, fuel, chemicals, decades of industrial activity soaked into the ground, exactly like the shipyard and the base. Contamination does not disappear because the flying stopped. And there is the opportunity cost, the largest and least visible line of all. This is a huge piece of land, often near useful places, that could be worth an enormous amount as something else. Every year it sits mothballed, The nation is choosing not to realize that value. A cost of holding the airfield is not just what you spend on it. It is everything you could have made from the land and deliberately did not. The reactivation gamble. Now, the part that makes this asset strategic and a gamble. An entire point of mothballing rather than selling is that the airfield can be brought back. So the question that governs everything is, how much would it actually cost? And how long would it take to make this dead field fly again? And the answer depends entirely on how it was held. A field kept lightly mothballed, runway maintained, systems preserved, might be reactivated in a reasonable time for a manageable cost. That bet paid off. Money spent holding it warm bought real, fast capability when it was needed. A field left to go cold. Runway cracked and overgrown. Systems rotted. Buildings collapsed. Might cost nearly as much to reactivate as to build new, and take almost as long. At that point, the mothballing achieved little. A nation paid to hold the land, then paid again, almost in full, to rebuild the capability anyway. This is the gamble at the heart of every mothballed airfield. You are betting on a future you cannot see. Spend heavily to keep it ready, and if the crisis never comes, you wasted the readiness money. Spend little to save money, and if the crisis does come, you may find the capability effectively gone when you reach for it. A right answer depends on a future nobody knows, and getting it wrong is expensive in either direction. And notice how uncomfortable a bet that is to make, honestly. It asks a finance ministry to spend real, measurable money now against a threat that is, by definition, uncertain and possibly distant. A hard number sits in this year's budget. Its benefit is a maybe. In a year nobody can name, against a crisis nobody can fully describe. Every incentive in ordinary budgeting pushes toward underspending on exactly this kind of option, which is why the readiness of reserve capability so often turns out, when tested, to be thinner than the official status suggested. Nations that do this well are the ones that make the bet deliberately, matching the level of readiness to a clear judgment about how likely and how urgent a future need really is, rather than drifting into neglect by default and discovering the cost only when it is too late. The pressure to sell? Here is the force that works against every mothballed airfield, relentlessly, year after year. That land is worth a fortune. A large, flat, cleared site, often with road access and infrastructure, sometimes near a growing town or city, is a developer's dream. Housing, industry, logistics, a solar farm, an entire new district. Value locked in that empty airfield, released, could fund a great deal, and there is always someone who wants it, and always a budget that could use the money. And the argument to sell is always seductive, because the cost of holding is visible and constant, while the benefit of holding is invisible and hypothetical. Every year, the airfield costs real money to secure and maintain, and every year, it does nothing. A saving from selling is concrete and immediate. A loss from selling is a capability you might need, one day, in a crisis that has not happened and might not. That asymmetry is exactly how strategic capabilities get quietly lost. Not in a single bad decision, but in the slow, reasonable accumulation of years where selling looked smart and holding looked wasteful. And the moment the runway is broken and the land is built over, the decision is irreversible. You cannot unsell a runway. A capability that took a war and a fortune to create is gone, and no check can bring it back once the houses are standing on it. So the mothballed airfield survives only as long as a nation keeps choosing, against constant pressure, to forego a certain gain today, to preserve an uncertain option tomorrow. That discipline is the entire thing keeping the asset alive. It helps to see the sale pressure clearly for what it is, because it wears the costume of pure common sense. Whoever argues to sell is not a villain. They are pointing at a real cost, a real need for money, a real and useful thing the land could become. Everything they say is true. What they cannot easily put on the other side of the ledger is the value of an option that may never be exercised, because that value is hard to price and easy to dismiss. So the argument is structurally lopsided. One side holds concrete numbers, the other holds a hunch about the future, and numbers usually win, which is precisely why so many irreplaceable things get sold. How a dead airfield earns while it waits. A mothballed airfield does not have to earn nothing. In fact, the smart ones partly pay for themselves, and understanding how is part of the economics. A first way is interim use of the land. Vast, flat, cleared ground has value even without flying. It can host solar arrays, storage, logistics, filming, motorsport, driver training, events, and a range of activities that use the space without permanently destroying the runway or the option to reactivate. These uses, crucially, are reversible. They generate income while the strategic option is preserved, rather than consuming it. A second is the runway and airspace themselves, for uses short of a full military return. Civilian flying, flight training, testing, air cargo, or a shared arrangement can keep the runway alive, generate revenue, and even fund some of the maintenance while the field remains available for its strategic purpose if the day comes. A runway that is used carefully is often better preserved than one left to rot, exactly like the wooden boat and the working tug. Use creates a maintenance rhythm and an income stream at the same time. There is a subtlety worth naming here, because it is where owners get into trouble. Interim use has to stay reversible, and the temptation is always to let it creep toward permanence, because permanent commitments pay better. A short-term solar lease is reversible. A fixed installation with a 30-year contract quietly is not. A film shoot is reversible. Selling a corner of the site for a warehouse is not. Real skill is capturing income from the emptiness without ever letting that income quietly consume the option it was supposed to help preserve. Owners who fail do not usually sell the airfield in one decision. They lease it away, a reversible-looking piece at a time, until one day there is no runway left to reactivate. A third is the buildings and the wider estate. Hangars become storage or workshops. Land is leased. Infrastructure that already exists has value to businesses that need space, and letting it earn while it waits offsets the holding cost. None of this is the main point of the airfield. Its main point is the strategic option. But an airfield that earns something while it waits is far easier to justify keeping than one that is pure cost, and the operators who preserve these sites successfully are usually the ones who found a way to make the emptiness pay a little without ever selling the option that is the real asset. The verdict. So, could you own a mothballed military airfield? Strategic ones, held deliberately in reserve by a nation? No. Like the tank factory, the dry dock, the boneyard, the weapons depot, and the fuel reserve. They are strategic capability, kept because a country judges the option worth more than the cost, and not for sale while that judgment holds. But airfields do get sold, and released ones do enter the market, and there this becomes a real and interesting asset. A former airfield is a vast, unusual, complicated piece of land, cheap by the acre precisely because it is so hard to use for anything conventional, and valuable to anyone who can unlock its potential, whether as development, as reversible interim use, or as a working civilian airfield. This is why former military airfields attract a very particular kind of buyer, not the simple developer who finds the sheer scale and the awkward runway and the contamination and the planning fights more trouble than an easier site. People who do well with these places are the ones who can see value in exactly the features that scare everyone else off. A runway useless for houses is perfect for driver training or testing. Isolation that kills a housing scheme is ideal for activities that need noise and space. That vast, flat expanse developers find daunting is exactly what a solar operator or a logistics park wants. An airfield rewards the buyer who works with its nature instead of fighting it, and punishes the one who tries to turn it into an ordinary plot. Owning one is a real business, and a hard one, because the very features that make it strategic, the size, the runway, the isolation, the history, are the features that make it difficult to convert to anything else. Here is the good year, a field held at the right point on the dial. Interim uses, solar, storage, filming, civilian flying cover a real share of the holding cost. Its runway is maintained by being lightly used rather than left to rot. A strategic option stays open, cheaply, and the site quietly earns its keep while remaining ready. A nation holds a real capability for a fraction of what building it new would cost. and a private owner turns an awkward asset into a working business. Now, the bad year. A field left to go cold to save money. Runway cracked. Buildings collapsed. The ground turned out to be contaminated, and the reactivation estimate came back nearly as high as building new. Or the pressure to sell finally won. The land went to housing, the money was spent, and then, years later, a need arose that the vanished runway could have met and could not be recreated at any price. That saving looked smart right up until the day it was revealed as a permanent, irreversible loss. Same concrete. What separates them is whether it was held with discipline and made to earn, or neglected and then either lost to rot or sold for a gain that could never be undone. Every other asset in this series is judged by whether it works. A factory that builds, a dock that lifts, a reserve that waits. A mothballed airfield is judged by whether a nation had the foresight to keep something it did not currently need, and the discipline to resist selling it for a gain it could see in order to preserve an option it could only imagine. That cracked concrete with grass growing through it is not a ruin. It is a question, asked every single year. Is a capability we are not using today worth more than the money we could make by destroying it forever? Most of the time, the honest answer is uncertain, which is exactly why these places are so easily and so quietly lost. You are not looking at an abandoned airfield. You are looking at a door a nation decided to leave unlocked, at real and constant expense, into a future it hopes it will never have to walk through, but was wise enough not to brick up. And the day that door is finally bricked up for a quick profit, it can never, at any price, be opened again.